for the real world. You ever just watch a kid? Like really watch them? Not in a creepy way, just observe. Watch how they laugh at the same jokes their dad laughs at, even though they clearly don't get the joke yet. Watch how they flinch before asking a question, that little hesitation, that quick scan of the room, checking if it's okay to be curious right now, or if they should just shut up and sit down. Watch how they apologize for things that aren't even problems. Watch how they hold their fork exactly, and I mean exactly the same way their mother holds hers. Watch how quickly, how efficiently they learn to make themselves smaller, to take up less space, to be less of whatever they naturally are. You are not watching a child develop. You are watching a human being get erased in real time. And the people doing the erasing, they call it parenting. They call it love. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit, the thing that makes people uncomfortable at dinner parties. Most parents are not raising children. They are manufacturing smaller, dimmer versions of themselves. They are taking a blank slate, a genuinely free consciousness that came into the world asking why about everything, and they are systematically, patiently, lovingly beating it into the same shape they were beaten into. And they call this love. They call this guidance. They call this preparing the child for the real world. Nietzsche would call it what it actually is: destruction. The slow, methodical destruction of everything that made that child an individual. A child comes into the world as something close to a philosopher. They ask why without embarrassment. Why is the sky blue? Why do I have to go to bed? Why can't I touch that? Why do you go to work if you hate it? They touch things they are told not to touch because they want to understand textures, temperatures, consequences. They cry without apology because they are sad or frustrated, and they have not yet learned that expressing genuine emotion makes adults uncomfortable. They laugh without asking permission first because something is funny, and their joy is not yet conditional on whether the room approves. They are, for a brief and beautiful window of time, genuinely themselves, unfiltered, uncensored, undomesticated. And then, slowly, patiently, lovingly, that gets corrected. The parents call it raising. Nietzsche would have called it taming, domestication, the breaking of a wild thing until it fits comfortably into the cage everyone else already lives in. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that the parents don't even know they're doing it. They genuinely believe they are helping, protecting, preparing their child for a harsh world. But what they are actually doing is making sure their child never becomes anything more than they themselves manage to become. Which, let's be honest, usually isn't much. There is a kind of stupidity that doesn't know it's stupid. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't walk into the room with a sign that says, "I am ignorant and proud." It arrives quietly, wrapped in familiarity, dressed in the respectable clothes of common sense and traditional wisdom. It says things like, "That's just how things are. Don't ask questions you can't answer. Be realistic. Stop dreaming. You'll understand when you're older." And people nod along because it sounds responsible. It sounds like wisdom. But it's not wisdom. It's cowardice dressed up as practicality. It's fear pretending to be advice. This kind of stupidity is not born, it is inherited. It passes from one generation to the next, not through genes, but through imitation, through the slow, unconscious absorption of how the adults around you move through the world without ever questioning whether that movement makes any sense. You learn how to think, or more accurately, how not to think, by watching the people who are supposed to teach you. And if those people never learn to think for themselves, if they are just repeating scripts handed to them by their parents who are repeating scripts handed to them, then what you are inheriting is not wisdom, it's intellectual bankruptcy passed down like a cursed family heirloom. Nietzsche understood this long before psychology became a formal discipline. He saw that most people do not think, they repeat. Most people do not choose their values. They absorb them from their environment like a sponge soaking up dirty water. Most people do not live their lives, they perform them. They follow a script handed down by parents who are following a script handed to them, stretching back through generations nobody can even name anymore. Nobody stops to ask if the script is any good. Nobody questions whether the play is worth performing. They just do it because everyone else is doing it, because that's what you do, because the alternative, thinking for yourself, is terrifying. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. That's Nietzsche, and he was right. But here's the tragedy. The real tragedy is not that most people never pay that price. The tragedy is that they make damn sure their children don't either. They see their child starting to think independently, starting to question, starting to become something unique, and they panic, and they correct it. They smooth it out. They sand down the edges until the child fits neatly into the box labeled normal. Let's be specific here, because vague philosophy is useless. What exactly do most parents teach their kids? Not the things they say they teach, not the values they post about on social media, the things they actually demonstrate through their behavior, through their reactions, through the environment they create day after day. They teach 4 things above all else, and every single one of them is poison, slow-acting, deeply embedded poison that will ruin that child's entire life. First, they teach obedience to authority, not reasoned respect, not cooperation based on mutual understanding, blind, reflexive obedience. When an adult speaks, you stop thinking and you comply. Sit down, be quiet, do what you're told, don't ask why. And look, when the kid is 3 years old and about to stick a fork in an electrical outlet, sure, fine, obedience in that moment keeps them alive. But somewhere along the way, that emergency response becomes the default mode. The lesson never evolves, it just solidifies into a permanent feature of their personality. The child grows up and the instinct remains, hardwired into their nervous system. Find the authority figure and obey them. Boss, government, doctor, tradition, expert. Whoever's loudest, whoever has the most credentials, whoever seems most certain becomes the guide. And the person never learns, not once in their entire life, how to think for themselves, because thinking for yourself was trained out of them before they even learned to tie their shoes. Second, they teach fear of failure disguised as ambition. They push grades, they push achievements, they push resume-building activities and respectable career paths, not because they want the child to be fulfilled or happy, let's be brutally honest here, but because they want the child to be safe from judgment, safe from embarrassment, safe from the possibility that someone, somewhere, might look at their kid and think less of them as parents. And the child absorbs this like a sponge absorbs water. They learn that their worth is conditional, that love has terms and conditions buried in the fine print, that they must perform adequately, jump through the right hoops, hit the right milestones, check the right boxes, where they are fundamentally unacceptable, fundamentally unlovable.
Do you know how many adults are walking around right now, fully grown, some of them in their 40s and 50s, still desperately trying to earn approval from parents who have been dead for 10 years? That's what this creates. A yearning, permanent sense that you are not enough unless you are achieving, performing, proving yourself over and over again. Third, and this one is particularly insidious, they teach emotional suppression and call it strength. Boys especially get this beaten into them, but girls get it too in different, quieter flavors. Don't cry, don't complain, don't be too much, don't be too loud, too weird, too sensitive, too emotional, too anything that makes other people uncomfortable. The child who feels deeply is told, directly or indirectly, that they are feeling wrong, that their emotional responses are excessive, inappropriate, embarrassing. And so they learn to swallow it. They learn to present a calm, controlled surface to the world and shove everything real, everything genuine underneath where nobody can see it. They learn that authenticity is dangerous and performance is safety. And then we actually wonder why adults can't process their emotions, why they explode in rage over minor inconveniences, why they are chronically anxious and depressed and completely disconnected from their own inner life, why they don't know what they feel or want or need. It's because they spent their entire childhood, the most formative years of their psychological development, learning that their actual feelings were unacceptable, that the real them was too much, so they buried it. And now, decades later, they don't even know where they buried it or how to dig it back up. And fourth, the most damaging one, the one Nietzsche saw most clearly, they teach that the group is always right, that consensus equals truth, that what everyone believes is probably what is real, that if you are the only one who sees a problem, you are probably the problem. This is the deepest poison, because a child who learns this, a child who internalizes this at a core level, will never be capable of standing alone in a correct position. They will forever need the crowd's permission before committing to a thought. They will poll their friends, check social media, look around the room to see what everyone else thinks before they allow themselves to think anything. They will mistake popularity for correctness and isolation for error. The parent who cannot think for themselves cannot raise a child who can. It is literally impossible. Here's the part that really stings, the part that makes people defensive. Most parents are not raising independent human beings. They are raising mirrors, reflections, echoes. The parent who is humiliated for being different raises a child who desperately, obsessively tries to blend in. The parent who is crushed by failure raises a child who is terrified to try anything risky, anything uncertain, anything that might not work out perfectly. The parent who is never allowed to express anger raises a child who doesn't know what to do with rage, who swallows it until it turns into depression or explodes at inappropriate times. The parent who is taught that certain questions are dangerous, that some topics are off limits, that doubt is weakness, raises a child who stops asking, who stops wondering, who stops thinking. We call this protection. We call this love. We call this good parenting. But at a deeper, more honest level, it's projection. The parent sees the child as a second chance, a do-over, an opportunity to navigate the dangers they themselves failed to navigate. And so they preload the child with the same coping mechanisms, the same defense strategies, the same limitations that they adopted when they were young and scared and trying to survive. The problem is that limitations are not love. Fear is not wisdom. Trauma is not a teaching tool. And a child who inherits your wounds does not inherit your strength. They inherit the scar tissue. They inherit the flinch. They inherit the damage without any of the context that might make it make sense. Nietzsche understood that the greatest obstacle to human development, to genuine growth, is not suffering. Suffering, he argued, can forge something stronger, can burn away weakness, can reveal what you are actually made of. The greatest obstacle is the refusal to look at yourself honestly and ask the hard questions. Is this actually good? Did I choose this, or did it just happen to me? Am I living, or am I performing? Am I thinking, or am I repeating? Most parents never ask this about themselves. They never examine their own beliefs, their own values, their own choices. They just accept whatever was handed to them and pass it along. And so they cannot possibly model genuine thought for their children. They cannot teach what they have never practiced. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. That's Nietzsche. The parent who has not mastered themselves, who has not done the hard work of self-examination and self-creation, will inevitably impose their unmastered chaos onto their child. Their unprocessed trauma, their unexamined assumptions, their unquestioned fears, all of it gets downloaded onto the next generation like a virus spreading from one computer to another. So what happens? The child grows up, gets a job they don't particularly like, gets married to someone they don't particularly understand, has kids of their own, and they repeat the cycle. They pass on the same fears, the same limitations, the same intellectual and emotional cowardice they inherited, and they never once stopped to ask if any of it was necessary, if any of it was true, if any of it actually served them or just kept them small and scared and manageable. They just do what was done to them because that's what you do. That's how it works. That's tradition. That's normal. And normal, in case you haven't noticed, is another word for broken, but everyone's too polite to say it. Every few generations, maybe every few dozen kids, one escapes. Not because they had perfect parents, not because they got lucky with their genetics or their circumstances, but because something in them, some stubborn, irritating, unkillable core, refused to be fully absorbed by the herd, refused to stop questioning when questioning became inconvenient or socially awkward, refused to close their eyes when the crowd insisted the darkness wasn't real, that everything was fine, that this is just how things are. Nietzsche called this the will to power, and people misunderstand this constantly. They think he meant power over others, domination, control, force, but that's not what he meant. He meant power over yourself, the capacity to impose form on your own existence instead of accepting whatever society tries to force onto you. The ability to choose your values instead of inheriting them passively. To take the raw, painful, chaotic mess of your life and shape it into something that is actually yours. Something that reflects what you genuinely believe and want and are, not what you were told to believe and want and be. He called the person capable of this the Übermensch, the overman, the person who has overcome, not overcome others, overcome themselves, overcome the programming. Not a god, not a superhero, not some impossible ideal, just a human being who did the difficult, unglamorous, deeply lonely work of becoming themselves instead of becoming what they were told to be. And this person, this rare person, does not emerge from comfort. They do not emerge from safety or protection or careful guidance. They emerge from friction, from conflict, from being told one thing by everyone around them and feeling something completely different inside and choosing, slowly and painfully and repeatedly, to trust the feeling instead of the crowd. They emerge from being wrong, publicly wrong, humiliatingly wrong, and surviving it. From learning that failure is not fatal, that embarrassment is temporary, that you can be rejected and misunderstood and dismissed and still wake up the next morning and keep going. They emerge from the willingness to be misunderstood by their parents, by their peers, by society at large, and to bear that misunderstanding without letting it destroy them, without letting it convince them that they are the problem. You cannot create this person by protecting them from everything that might hurt. You cannot bubble wrap a child into strength. You create this person by teaching them that hurt is survivable, that failure is not the end of the world, that being wrong is part of learning, that discomfort is not danger, that you can fall and get back up, that you can be rejected and still have value, that your worth is not determined by other people's opinions or approval. So what does it actually mean to raise a child well? Not well by society's definition,
Not a polite, obedient, well-adjusted robot who colors inside the lines and never makes waves, but well by the deeper measure, the measure that actually matters. A child who can think, a child who can stand alone when necessary, a child who can become genuinely themselves instead of a poorly made photocopy of you or whoever they think they're supposed to be. It starts with something almost no parent does naturally, something that goes against every protective instinct, letting the child be wrong. Not wrong about facts, you can correct those. 2 + 2 is 4, not 5, that's fine to correct. But wrong in their opinions, wrong in their attempts, wrong in their conclusions, wrong in their guesses about how the world works. The instinct of every loving parent is to save the child from failure, from disappointment, from the painful experience of being incorrect. But a child who never fails, who is always caught before they hit the ground, does not learn that failure ends. They believe, somewhere deep in their nervous system, that failure is permanent, fatal, the end of everything. And so they become incapable of taking any real risk. They spend their whole life playing it safe, staying small, never attempting anything that might not work out perfectly. And playing it safe means never becoming anything real or interesting or worth remembering. It continues with taking the child's questions seriously. And I mean actually seriously. Not humoring them in that condescending way adults do. Not patting them on the head and giving them a simplified answer designed to shut them up. Actually engaging with the question. Actually saying, you know what, that is a really good question, and I don't know the answer. Let's figure it out together. Or better, even better, let's sit with not knowing together. Let's be okay with the fact that some questions don't have easy answers, and that's fine. That's part of life. That's where thinking begins. A child who grows up in a house where questions are welcome, where curiosity is encouraged, where not knowing is treated as an opportunity rather than a failure, becomes an adult who asks questions, who investigates, who thinks. A child who grows up in a house where certain topics are off limits, where authority cannot be challenged, where doubt is discouraged, where asking why is treated as disrespect, becomes an adult who flinches before their own curiosity, who swallows their questions, who accepts what they are told without examination, because examination was trained out of them early. It means teaching the child to tolerate discomfort, not to seek it out masochistically, not to pursue pain for its own sake, but to understand that discomfort is not the same thing as danger, that boredom is not an emergency requiring immediate stimulation, that loneliness is not something to be instantly numbed with a screen or a distraction, that the feeling of not knowing what you think yet, of being uncertain, of being confused, is not a failure of intelligence. It is the beginning of thinking. It is where actual thought starts. It means allowing, even encouraging the child to disagree with you, even about important things, especially about important things. The parent who cannot be questioned by their own child, who responds to anger or hurt feelings or punishment, is teaching that authority matters more than truth, that obedience matters more than honesty. And that lesson, that deep lesson, follows the child into every relationship, every job, every institution, every moment when they should speak up, should object, should say, "This is wrong." And instead, they stay silent, because they learned early, before they even had language for it, that challenging authority gets you punished. It means being honest about your own failures, not performatively, not as a way of dumping your emotional baggage onto a kid who can't handle it, but as evidence that failure is livable, that you can be broken and rebuild yourself,
that making mistakes does not make you contemptible or worthless or unlovable, that you can be wrong and still be okay. It means, in the deepest and most important sense, raising a person instead of raising a miniature version of yourself, instead of raising someone who will make you look good, instead of raising someone who will validate your choices, raising an actual independent human being who might, probably will, become something you didn't plan for, something you don't fully understand, something that makes you uncomfortable, and being okay with that, being proud of that even. The greatest gift a parent can give is not safety, because safety is an illusion anyway. The world is not safe. Life is not safe. Existence is not safe. The greatest gift is the capacity to navigate a world that will never be fully safe. The tools to think, the courage to stand alone, the resilience to fail and recover, the honesty to look at reality without flinching. Nietzsche died without children of his own. Whether that was a loss or a mercy, we can't know. But he understood something about inheritance that most parents never stop to examine. What you pass to the next generation is not primarily what you say, it is what you are. It is the quality of your attention, the depth of your honesty, the breadth of your courage, or the absence of those things. Children don't listen to your words, they watch your life. They absorb your example. They become what you show them, not what you tell them. A parent who has never questioned their own beliefs raises a child who doesn't know that beliefs can be questioned, who thinks that doubt is weakness and certainty is strength. A parent who has never sat with uncertainty, who always needs an answer, who can't tolerate not knowing, raises a child who is terrified of ambiguity, who needs everything to be clear and simple and certain, who falls apart when life gets complicated. A parent who has never disobeyed anything, not a rule, not a consensus, not a tradition, not a quiet internal pressure to be less than they could be, raises a child who obeys everything, who never rocks the boat, who never makes waves, who spends their entire life trying to be acceptable. And the world is full, so painfully full of people like this. People who obey everything, who stand in the right lines, who say the right words, who hold the right opinions for their particular tribe, who never question, never challenge, never think, who wake up at 50 years old and feel, beneath all the accumulated correct decisions and proper choices, a quiet, sourceless grief. The grief of a life that was performed instead of lived. The grief of realizing too late that they never actually became themselves. They became what they were supposed to become, and it's not the same thing. This is what the herd produces. Not monsters, not villains, just absences. Just people-shaped spaces where a person might have been, where a unique consciousness might have developed, where something genuine might have existed, but didn't, because it was corrected out of them before it had a chance to grow. The question, the only question that matters, is not whether you love your children. Of course you love your children. Every parent loves their children, even the terrible ones. Love is not the issue. The question is whether that love is big enough, brave enough, honest enough to want more for them than safety, more than acceptance, more than fitting in. Whether it is strong enough to model something actually worth imitating instead of just passing on your own damage. Whether it is courageous enough to let them become something you didn't plan for, something you might not even recognize, something that might make you uncomfortable or confused or even a little bit scared. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." Read that again. One must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star.
The child who becomes something rare, something real, something free, that child was not protected from chaos. They were not shielded from uncertainty or difficulty or confusion. They were taught to dance in it, to move through it, to use it. And the parent who teaches that, who holds their own uncertainty without collapsing into fear, who tells the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable, who loves fiercely without needing the child to stay small and manageable and easy, that parent is doing something genuinely difficult. Something the herd will never understand or appreciate. Something that might not even be recognized or acknowledged until long after the parent is gone. But maybe, years later, decades later, that child, now grown, now tested by life, now standing alone in some difficult moment, will reach inside themselves looking for guidance, and they will find something solid. Not a rule, not an instruction, not a voice telling them what to think or what to do, just a quiet, unshakable knowledge that they can think, that they have always been capable of thinking, and that someone once believed that about them before they believed it about themselves. And that might be enough. You are going to die. Not someday, not eventually. You are going to die, and there is nothing you can do about it. No amount of money, no diet, no religion, no amount of productivity, no legacy, no love. Nothing you have ever done or will ever do changes that single, brutal, non-negotiable fact. You will stop existing. The lights will go out. And what makes this even more disturbing is that right now, as you hear these words, some part of your brain already knows this, has always known this, and has been quietly screaming about it every single day of your life. The thought slips in at 3 a.m. when you cannot sleep. It hijacks your mind in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. You are driving, you are eating, you are laughing at something stupid, and then out of nowhere, like a cold hand on your shoulder, the thought arrives. You are going to die. And you cannot stop thinking about it. Why? Why does this keep happening? Why can you not just accept it and move on? Why does this one fact, this one unavoidable truth, have such complete and total dominion over your psychology? The answer to that question is not what you think it is. And by the end of this, you are going to understand something about yourself that will reframe everything. Not just the death anxiety, everything. The career you chose, the relationships you cling to, the beliefs you defend like your life depends on them. The reason you do almost anything you do. All of it, every single piece of it, is secretly a conversation with death. And you have been having that conversation without even knowing it. So let us start at the beginning. Let us start with the fact that your brain is broken in a very specific and very revealing way. There's a study, a famous one, where researchers asked people to think about their own death. Not someone else's death, not death in the abstract, their own. The cessation of their own consciousness, the permanent and total end of their subjective experience. And what happened in the brain during that exercise is one of the most fascinating and disturbing things neuroscience has ever documented. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for self-referential thinking, the part that lights up when you think about yourself, your memories, your future, your identity, it went quiet. It essentially refused to process the information. The brain, when confronted with the concept of its own non-existence, does not engage with it. It deflects, it reroutes, it treats the idea of your own death almost like a grammatical error, like a sentence that cannot be parsed, like a concept that does not compute. Freud noticed this more than a century ago. He wrote that it is indeed impossible to imagine our own death, and whenever we attempt to do so, we can perceive that we are in fact still present as spectators. Think about that. Think about what that actually means. You cannot imagine not existing. Every time you try to picture your own death, you imagine it from the outside. You imagine your funeral. You imagine people grieving. You imagine the world going on without you. But in every single one of those imaginings, you are still there. You are still watching. You are still the camera. The brain is physically incapable of simulating a reality in which it does not exist. And this one cognitive glitch, this one fundamental limitation of human consciousness, this is the engine behind almost everything you have ever done. This is where it all starts. This is ground zero of the human condition. The psychologist Sheldon Solomon, along with Jeff Greenberg and Tom Pishinsky, spent decades studying what happens to human behavior when people are reminded of their mortality. Their work, called terror management theory, is one of the most replicated and most unsettling bodies of research in all of psychology. The basic premise is this: humans are unique among all animals in that we are aware of our own death. We know it is coming. We have known it is coming since we were roughly 5 or 6 years old, and we figured out that death was not a reversible condition. That awareness, that knowledge, creates...
The guys at Northlock should just move to a different place. Judging by the number of problems they have, they must have built their village on some ancient burial grounds or something. Now it's water that's giving them trouble. Of two kinds, no less. On one hand, their water supply is out. So you'll need to check if the local pump station is still in the same reality as us. On the other, the village is in constant danger of being flooded. So they've been relying on a concrete pier. Won't even ask you to guess what was damaged by the quake and who was asked to fix it. You'll need quite a few concrete slabs to do it. And luckily, there's a convoy carrying them at the eastern tunnel. It needs a route to deliver those to the nearest warehouse, though. So you'll need to take care of that. Oh, and get some eggs and sugar. I'm joking. Unfortunately, I'll have to get those.
I need to learn more about terror management.
Think about what that actually means. You
Yeah.
cannot imagine not existing. Every time you try to picture your own death, you imagine it from the outside. You imagine your funeral. You imagine people grieving. You imagine the world going on without you. But in every single one of those imaginings, you are still there. You are still watching. You are still the camera. The brain is physically incapable of simulating a reality in which it does not exist. And this one cognitive glitch, this one fundamental limitation of human consciousness, this is the engine behind almost everything you have ever done. This is where it all starts. This is ground zero of the human condition. The psychologist Sheldon Solomon, along with Jeff Greenberg and Tom Pishinsky, spent decades studying what happens to human behavior when people are reminded of their mortality. Their work, called terror management theory, is one of the most replicated and most unsettling bodies of research in all of psychology. The basic premise is this: humans are unique among all animals in that we are aware of our own death. We know it is coming. We have known it is coming since we were roughly 5 or 6 years old, and we figured out that death was not a reversible condition. That awareness, that knowledge, creates what Solomon and his colleagues call existential terror, a raw, primal, overwhelming dread that, if left unchecked, would paralyze us completely, would make it impossible to get out of bed, would make every single action feel pointless. If you are going to die, why eat? If you are going to die, why build anything? If you are going to die, why love anyone? The terror is not a small thing. It is not a background hum of mild anxiety. Solomon described it once as the potential for a devastating existential panic that is always lurking just below the surface of conscious awareness. Always there, always waiting. A monster living in the basement of your mind that you have been spending your entire life learning not to wake up. And the way you keep it asleep, the mechanisms your brain has built to manage this terror, they're extraordinary, they're ingenious, and they are running right now in the background of everything you think and do and feel without your knowledge or permission. Here's where terror management theory gets genuinely disturbing. The researchers didn't just theorize about death anxiety, they tested it. Hundreds of experiments across dozens of cultures with thousands of participants. The setup was always some variation of the same thing. Take two groups of people, make one group think about their own death, their mortality salience, as the researchers call it. Ask them to write about what happens to them physically when they die, and what the experience of dying will be like. Then give both groups a task, a judgment to make, a decision, a behavior to perform, and measure the difference. The results were so consistent, so dramatic, and so deeply strange that they fundamentally changed how psychologists think about human motivation. When people were reminded of their death, when mortality salience was triggered, they became more aggressive toward people who held different worldviews. In one study, American students who had been prompted to think about their death recommended harsher legal punishments for a prostitute. Not because the prostitution was worse, because death reminders make people cling harder to their cultural values and attack those who violate them. They became more charitable and kind toward people who shared their worldview and more hostile to people who did not. Death reminders made people more materialistic, more interested in accumulating wealth and status. They made people more likely to take physical risks, more desperate to feel special, unique, significant. And in some studies, death reminders made people physically more aggressive, actually recommending more hot sauce be given to someone who had insulted their values, even when they knew the person hated spicy food. All of this from a brief prompt about mortality. All of this for making someone think for just a moment about the fact that they are going to die. The implications of this are staggering, because if a brief artificial reminder of death can produce these effects in a controlled lab setting, what is a lifetime of knowing you were mortal doing to you? What is a lifetime of suppressing and managing and outrunning the awareness of your own death doing to your decisions, your relationships, your politics, your ambitions, your entire self-concept? The answer is everything. It is doing everything. But to understand why, you have to go deeper. You have to understand what.
Looking at this place, I must say I was hoping for better. On the other hand, I was expecting worse. So, it balances out in the end. Just a few patches should get it going again. Does a whole new backup generator count as a patch? Let's just say it does, and bring one from the logistics terminal along with some materials from the warehouse. As for literal patches, you'll need to replace the broken pipes in the pipeline supplying the village. And also find a replacement valve and install it. It's a lot of stuff to do, I know. But this should take care of all the water supply problems Northlock is having.
Northlock. What's Northlock? Where is Northern? Oh, this. But yeah, I'm the predictor. Why eat if I'm gonna die? That makes sense. Like, why have I self-neglected so much? It wasn't because I was broken per se, damaged, sick. It's because well, I don't know. This might be a dumb thing to say, but it could be because I jumped too far ahead, thinking that meaning was only meaningful or could be only found, was valid if it was eternal, not if it was temporary. And since a conscious life, a human life, is temporary, I saw it as like, what's the point? Why risk it? I'm gonna be hurt. There's pain. I'm gonna be tired. Why shower if I'm gonna sweat again and get dirty? And why love if I will lose it, lose her, lose him? I didn't see any justification to go through the fucking hassle. At least that's what I'm telling myself today. That's how I explain it. It just doesn't make fucking sense. Logical sense. But of course, I know that I wish I would have not reached this level of awareness, this knowledge, this understanding. Just live a deluded life, not thinking about these things. Not even in my deathbed. And so, yeah. It doesn't make any fucking sense. But anyway.
What your brain actually needs in order to keep the monster in the basement from waking up.
Right.
Solomon and his colleagues identified two primary psychological buffers against existential terror. Two things your brain needs in order to function without being consumed by the awareness of death. The first is self-esteem. And I do not mean self-esteem in the soft, feel-good participation trophy sense. I mean something much more specific and much more primal. Terror management theory defines self-esteem as the sense that you are a valuable member of a meaningful universe, that you matter, that your life has significance, that you are not just a biological accident, a temporary configuration of carbon and water that will dissolve back into the earth and be forgotten. Self-esteem in this framework is a death shield. When you feel good about yourself, when you feel significant, when you feel like your life is meaningful, the terror recedes, the monster sleeps. When you feel worthless, meaningless, like nothing you do matters, the terror surges. And this is why human beings are so extraordinarily, pathologically sensitive to criticism. Why rejection feels like it might kill you. Why being ignored or dismissed or made to feel small triggers something that is completely out of proportion to the actual threat. Because on a deep, unconscious level, your self-esteem is not just about your feelings, it is about your survival. When someone makes you feel worthless, they are poking the monster. They are threatening the very mechanism you use to keep the terror at bay, and your brain responds accordingly, with rage, with grief, with desperate reassertion of your significance. The second buffer is cultural worldview, your belief system, your religion, your politics, your values, your understanding of what reality is and what a good life looks like. Every human culture, every one of them, without exception, throughout all of human history, has provided its members with a framework that says, this is what reality is, this is what you should do within it, and if you do these things, your life will have meaning that extends beyond your physical death. Every culture tells a story about how you can transcend death. Maybe you literally go to heaven. Maybe your legacy lives on. Maybe you are reincarnated. Maybe you achieve enlightenment and dissolve into the infinite. Maybe your contributions to human knowledge outlast you. Maybe your children carry your genes forward. Maybe you become famous. Every single human cultural system is, at its core, a story about how your significance can outlast your physical body. And when someone attacks your worldview, when someone says your religion is wrong, your politics are stupid, your values are barbaric, they are not just insulting your opinions, they are attacking your death shield. They are threatening the story that keeps you functional in the face of inevitable annihilation.
Wow.
This is why ideological arguments become so visceral so fast. This is why people will sacrifice their relationships, their careers, sometimes their lives to defend beliefs. Because those beliefs are not just ideas, they are existential armor. And when they come under attack, you fight back like your life depends on it, because on the most fundamental psychological level, it does. Now here is where you need to sit with something uncomfortable. Every single thing you have ever done to feel significant, every achievement, every acquisition, every relationship you have curated to feel loved and seen, every political tribe you have joined to feel like part of something larger than yourself, every belief you have defended with anger and contempt, every risk you have taken to prove your own vitality, every act of cruelty and every act of extraordinary generosity, all of it is partially, maybe predominantly, downstream of the awareness of your own death. This is not a metaphor. This is not philosophy. This is documented, replicated, empirically measured psychological reality. The career you have is partly a death denial mechanism. The values you hold most fiercely are partly death denial mechanisms. The people you hate are people who threaten your death denial mechanisms. The people you love are people who reinforce your sense of significance and make the world feel meaningful, which means they are helping you manage your death anxiety. None of this makes your achievements less real. None of this makes your love less genuine. But it means that the stories you tell yourself about why you do what you do are radically incomplete. There is a driver underneath all the other drivers, a force beneath all the other forces, and it has been steering you from the very beginning, in the dark, without your awareness or consent. But this is only half the picture, because while terror management theory explains how death anxiety shapes your behavior from the outside, Heidegger, 100 years earlier, had already identified something even more fundamental happening at the level of existence itself. And what Heidegger found is not depressing. It is, in the strangest possible way, the most important thing you will ever understand about being alive. Martin Heidegger was a German philosopher writing in the early 20th century, and his work is notoriously difficult, notoriously dense, notoriously demanding. But buried inside all that difficulty is an insight of almost unbearable clarity. Heidegger argued that death is not the enemy of life. Death is the condition that makes genuine life possible. Let that sit. Death is not the thing that ruins your life. Death is the thing that makes your life real. Here's his argument. Most people, according to Heidegger, do not actually live their own lives. They live what he called das Man, the they self. They do what one does. They want what one wants. They care about what people care about. They are completely absorbed into the anonymous crowd of social expectation and convention, following paths that were laid out before they arrived, pursuing goals they never actually chose, never once stopping to ask whether any of this is actually what they would have chosen if they had genuinely owned their own existence. And the reason they never stop to ask is because they are running from something. They are running from what Heidegger called the anxiety of non-being, the vertiginous, nauseating awareness that your existence is finite, that every moment you spend living someone else's life is a moment of your actual, irreplaceable, unrepeatable existence that is gone forever. The awareness of death in Heidegger's framework is not a source of terror to be suppressed. It is a summons, a call back to yourself, a reminder that this is not a rehearsal, that you are not going to get another run at this, that every day you spend in inauthentic existence, in what he called fallenness, is a day of your actual life that you are throwing away.
Yeah.
Heidegger used the term being toward death to describe what he thought the authentic posture toward mortality looked like. Not pretending death is not real, not distracting yourself with busyness and consumption and noise, but holding the awareness of your own finitude in front of you, consciously, deliberately, as a lens to see your life clearly. When you genuinely confront your own death, not in the abstract, not as a philosophical exercise, but as a lived, felt reality that is bearing down on you with complete certainty, the trivialities fall away. The petty resentments, the social anxieties, the desperate need for approval from people you don't even respect, the career you chose because it sounded impressive, the life you have been living on autopilot because the autopilot is quieter than the awareness. All of it becomes suddenly, shockingly, obviously not worth the time you are spending on it. Death, in Heidegger's framework, is the most clarifying force in human existence. It is not what you are running from. It is what you have been running from when you should have been running toward it. Not in a morbid, nihilistic way, in the way that a terminal patient who is told they have 6 months to live suddenly finds themselves unable to care about things they spent decades worrying about, and simultaneously finds themselves achingly, overwhelmingly aware of the beauty and preciousness of ordinary life. That is what death can do for you if you stop running from it. But there was another thinker who took this even further, who combined the psychological and the philosophical and the anthropological into a single, devastating, magnificent argument that explains not just your death anxiety, but the entire structure of human civilization. And his name was Ernest Becker. Ernest Becker, who's a cultural anthropologist who won the Pulitzer Prize in 1974 for a book called The Denial of Death, and then died of cancer before he could receive the award.
Damn.
The cruelty of that timing is almost too perfect to be fictional.
Well, I mean, what if he
Becker's
didn't
central
even want it?
argument, the spine of his entire body of work, is this: the basic motivation of human behavior is the need to deny and transcend death. Not sex, not power, not love. Death.
Okay,
Everything
I can agree
human
with that.
beings build,
It's
every
for-
institution, every belief system, every work of art, every act of heroism,
Every empire, every religion, every philosophy, every cultural achievement in the entire sweep of human history, it is all, at some level, a response to the terror of death. Becker called it the Immortality Project, the idea that humans cope with mortality by embedding themselves in something that feels larger and more permanent than their individual biological life. You contribute to a religion that has existed for thousands of years and will exist for thousands more. You create art that outlasts your body. You have children who carry your genes and your name forward. You build companies, write books, win wars, accumulate power, earn the love of others. And all of these things are, in part, attempts to say, I was here, I mattered, I will not be entirely erased. Becker called these hero systems.
I'm just thinking, I can't stop, or couldn't stop imagining. I wish I knew this, like, since a very early age. Maybe not specifically a child, but maybe after my teens, or at least start to get introduced to it. And I was like, if I would have had, I think, if I don't know if I would be making more damage than I can imagine, but if I had a son or a daughter, I think I would be making them a solid, a favor, by telling them to be aware that we're all gonna die. Nothing is that deep. Don't sweat the small stuff like I did. And what else? I guess, well, I don't know. What the fuck? Well, yeah, just continue.
Every culture constructs a system through which ordinary people can achieve symbolic immortality, can leave a mark, can participate in something that transcends biological death. And the need to be a hero, in Becker's terms, is not a desire for fame or glory. It is a fundamental existential necessity. You need to feel like your life matters.
Yeah.
Because if it does not matter, then the full weight of your mortality descends on you with nothing to stop it. When Becker writes that man's dignity is more biological than we thought, that the need to feel heroic is as deep and as animal as the need for food and sex, he is not using a metaphor. He is describing the actual operational mechanics of human psychological survival. But here is the part of Becker's argument that is the most disturbing and the most clarifying in equal measure. He argued that not only is every individual human being engaged in a personal immortality project, but that the collision between different immortality projects, between different hero systems, between different ways of achieving symbolic transcendence over death is the primary engine of human conflict. Wars are not really about land or resources. They are about whose story about the universe is real. Religious conflicts are not really about theology. They are about which immortality project is valid. Political conflicts are not really about policy. They are about which group gets to feel cosmically significant and which group has to live with the terror of insignificance. When you look at human history through this lens, when you see every atrocity, every genocide, every holy war, every ideological purge as the result of people so terrified of their own annihilation that they will destroy anyone who threatens the story that keeps them functional, it is not a comfortable view, but it is the most accurate one. And the question it leaves you with is devastating. If you are not aware of your immortality project, if you have never examined the death denial mechanisms that are quietly running your life, then you are not free. You are a puppet. You are being driven by forces you cannot see, toward destinations you never consciously chose, in service of a story that may have nothing to do with who you actually are or what you actually want. And that, more than the death itself, is the real tragedy. But now we need to talk about what happens when the death anxiety breaks through, when the defenses fail, when mortality salience is not a brief experimental prompt, but a sustained, inescapable reality. Because this is where the picture changes. This is where the story stops being just dark and becomes something stranger and more important. There is a phenomenon that researchers and clinicians have documented over and over again in people who have confronted their own death directly. Not people who think about death abstractly, people who have been told they have a terminal diagnosis, people who have survived near-death experiences, people who have come through catastrophic illness or injury or violence with the full, visceral, bodily knowledge that their death is real and close. And what these people report is almost always the same. They report a radical shift in what they care about. The petty concerns fall away, the social anxieties evaporate. The career ambitions that felt so urgent suddenly feel hollow. And in their place, what rises is an almost unbearable tenderness toward the ordinary. The way light falls through a window, the feeling of someone else's hand in yours, the taste of coffee in the morning, the way a child laughs. People who have faced death report that their experience of being alive becomes almost intolerably vivid and precious. They stop performing their lives and start actually living them. They stop filling time with noise and distraction and start actually feeling their feelings and having their thoughts and being, for perhaps the first time, fully themselves. This is not a coincidence. This is not a side effect. This is Heidegger's being toward death in action. This is what happens when you stop suppressing the awareness of death and start allowing it to inform your life. The terror does not disappear, but it transforms. It becomes something you can use, something that points you toward what is actually real and actually yours and actually worth spending the irreplaceable days of your actual life on. The psychologist Irvin Yalom, who spent decades doing existential psychotherapy with terminally ill patients, documented this transformation with extraordinary detail and compassion. He called it the awakening experience, the realization, usually forced on people by a confrontation with mortality, that they have been living inauthentically, that they have been deferring the life they actually want to live in favor of the life that seems safe or expected or approved of. And he noticed something remarkable. The people who had the hardest time with terminal diagnoses were not the ones who had lived the fullest lives. They were the ones who had deferred the most, the ones who had spent decades waiting for the right time, the right circumstances, the right permission to finally start living the life they actually wanted. Because when the diagnosis came, they were not mourning the loss of a life fully lived. They were mourning the loss of a life never started. And the people who seemed most at peace with their deaths, who seemed most able to face the end without overwhelming terror, were the ones who felt, despite everything, that they had shown up, that they had been present, that they had not spent their finite time on Earth impersonating someone else. Yalom's work is full of these reversals, these moments where people who were theoretically supposed to be the most afraid turn out to be the most free. And every single one of those reversals was downstream of the same thing, a genuine confrontation with mortality, not as an abstraction, but as a personal reality that had forced a clarity of values and a commitment to authentic living that all the therapy and meditation and personal development work in the world had failed to produce. So let us talk about what you are actually doing right now. Let us
am I
talk
doing
about how
right
you are
now?
managing your own death anxiety in this moment, today, in the life you are
Numbing
currently
out.
living. Because this is where it gets personal. You almost certainly have an immortality project. You probably have several. The question is whether you chose them or whether
I
they
wanted to
chose you.
contribute. Wow.
Are you pursuing the
Yep.
career you are pursuing
That
because it
is so
genuinely
true.
reflects your deepest values and your most authentic sense of what your life is for? Or are you pursuing it because it provides status and significance in the cultural framework you grew up in? Because it makes the people whose approval you need see you as a hero? Because it is a story you can tell about yourself that keeps the awareness of your own meaninglessness at bay? Are the relationships you are in, the community you belong to, the political tribe you identify with, the beliefs you defend, are they genuinely yours, chosen freely from a position of self-knowledge and authentic values? Or are they the cultural
Freely?
scaffolding you were handed at birth, the hero system of the civilization you happened to be born into, which you have accepted uncritically because examining it too closely would require confronting the terror that the system was designed to conceal? This is not an accusation. This is an invitation. Because here's the most important thing Becker ever wrote. He said that the crisis of modern man is not that he has too few choices, but that he has too many heroes and not enough genuine ones. He said that the task of psychological maturity is not to eliminate the need for heroism, not to pretend you do not need your life to mean something, but to choose your immortality project consciously, to look at the full, terrifying reality of your own death, and then, from that clear-eyed place, to decide what you are actually going to do with the time you have, not what you were told to do, not what will make you look significant in the eyes of people who are also running from death. What you, this specific and irreplaceable and utterly temporary human being, actually want to do with your one shot at existence. That is not easy. It requires sitting with the terror instead of running from it. It requires letting the awareness of your mortality do its clarifying work, letting it burn away the inauthentic, the inherited, the merely impressive, until what is left is the life that is actually yours. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is spending your entire finite existence in service of a death denial mechanism you never examined, chasing significance in a framework you never chose, and arriving at the end of your life with the particular horror of realizing you spent it performing for an audience whose approval you thought you needed in order to feel real. There is a concept in Buddhism that maps onto all of this with striking precision, the concept of impermanence, anicca in Pali, which is one of the three marks of existence in Buddhist philosophy. Everything that arises passes away. Every experience, every relationship, every sensation, every thought, every version of yourself. Nothing is permanent. Nothing lasts. And the Buddhist insight is not that this is a tragedy to be mourned. The insight is that the resistance to impermanence, the desperate clinging to things and people and identities and versions of reality that are already changing and already passing, is the source of suffering. Not the impermanence itself, the clinging. When you cannot stop thinking about your death, you are, in Buddhist terms, colliding with impermanence at the level of the self. The self that keeps thinking about death is the same self that is terrified of not existing. And the terror is not the problem. The clinging to existence, the refusal to let go of the identity and the continuity and the story of the self, that is the problem. The Buddhist practice is not to become indifferent to life. It is to become so fully present to life, to each moment as it actually is rather than as you wish it were, that the impermanence stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like the texture of reality itself. This is the same destination that Heidegger is pointing toward from a completely different direction. Full presence,
authentic engagement, the willingness to be here completely without the armor of denial and distraction and noise. The willingness to know that this is temporary and to find that knowledge not paralyzing, but clarifying. Not a reason for despair, but a reason to be here, fully, now, without reservation. And then there is Camus. Albert Camus, who looked at the same abyss everyone else was looking at, the absurdity of a human being who needs meaning living in a universe that provides none, and who refused both the religious leap of faith and the philosophical suicide, who instead proposed something that sounds simple, but is actually the most demanding thing imaginable. The only way to answer the absurd, he argued, is to live in open rebellion against it. To know that your life is finite and meaningless in the cosmic sense, and to choose to create meaning anyway. Not because the universe demands it, not because God rewards it, not because your death anxiety is quieted by it, but because the act of living fully, of loving and creating and engaging and being genuinely present to the life you have is its own justification. Camus ended his essay on Sisyphus, that mythological figure condemned to roll a boulder up a hill forever, only to watch it roll back down each time, by writing that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Not because his situation has changed, not because the boulder gets lighter or the hill gets smaller, but because he owns his fate, because the struggle itself is enough. Because the awareness of the absurdity, fully accepted and fully embraced, rather than denied or evaded, becomes the ground for a kind of freedom that nothing can take away, not even death. So what does all of this mean for the thought that keeps coming back? The thought about your death, the one that arrives uninvited at 3 a.m. or in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. What do you do with it? The answer is not what the noise merchants want to sell you. It is not a meditation app or a productivity system or a gratitude journal or any of the 1,000 distraction mechanisms that the modern world has constructed to keep the monster in the basement. The answer is to let the thought arrive, to stop running, to sit with it, even briefly, even uncomfortably, and to let it ask you what it is trying to ask you. Because the thought of death is not your enemy. It is the most honest thought you will ever have. It is the thought that strips away every pretension and every performance and every borrowed value and asks you in the most fundamental possible terms, what are you actually doing with this? What are you actually here for? Who are you actually trying to be? And those questions, asked honestly and answered honestly, are the beginning of a life that is genuinely yours. Not the life you inherited, not the life that manages your terror most effectively, the life you would choose if you were not afraid, which is, in the end, the only life worth having. Here is the hard truth. Most people will never do this. Most people will spend their entire lives getting very good at not thinking about death. They will fill every silence with noise. They will keep themselves so busy, so stimulated, so distracted that the thought never quite has time to land. They will build their immortality projects on foundations they never examined, pursue significance in frameworks they never chose, and arrive at the end with a particular kind of bewilderment, the bewilderment of someone who ran very fast in a direction they never decided to go. And that is their right. Nobody is obligated to confront their own mortality. Nobody is required to do the terrifying work of stripping away the death denial mechanisms and finding out what is underneath. But you are watching this. You found this video. And that means something,
Because people who are successfully suppressing their death anxiety do not voluntarily spend time watching videos that make them think about death. You are here because some part of you is already not running anymore. Some part of you has already decided that the awareness, however uncomfortable, is preferable to the alternative. And that is where everything changes. That is the beginning of the examined life. Not in a comfortable, abstract, philosophical sense, in the specific, personal, confrontational sense of looking at your actual life, the one you are actually living, the choices you have actually made, the things you are actually spending your finite time on, and asking whether any of it would survive contact with the full, unmediated awareness of your own death. What would you stop doing tomorrow if you knew you were dying? What would you start? Who would you call? What would you stop pretending about yourself? What would you finally let yourself be? Those are not rhetorical questions. They are the most important questions a human being can ask. And the fact that you can only ask them clearly in the light of mortality, that death is the lens that brings life into focus, is not a cruel irony. It is, if you can stand to see it that way, a gift. The most terrifying, most clarifying, most honest gift that existence has to offer. The psychologist Robert Kastenbaum spent a career studying what he called death attitudes, the range of ways human beings orient toward their own mortality. And what he found was not a simple spectrum from terror to acceptance. What he found was a complex, multi-dimensional set of responses that included not just fear and avoidance, but also something he called death transcendence. The capacity to engage with mortality in a way that actually enriches life, rather than diminishing it. The people who exhibited death transcendence were not people who had achieved some mystical freedom from fear. They were people who had done the work, who had confronted their mortality directly, repeatedly, honestly, and who had come out the other side not with certainty or peace in any easy sense, but with a kind of orientation toward life that was richer, more specific, more genuinely their own than anything they had before. They had stopped performing their lives and started inhabiting them. They had traded the comfort of denial for the aliveness of full presence. And Kastenbaum's data showed consistently that these people were not the exception, they were the possibility. Any human being who is willing to do the confrontation, to stop running, to let the awareness land and do its work, can move toward this. It is not reserved for the enlightened or the unusually courageous or the terminally diagnosed. It is available to anyone who is willing to stop treating the awareness of death as a problem to be solved and start treating it as a teacher to be listened to. William James, the American philosopher and psychologist who wrote at the turn of the 20th century, said something that has stayed with me in a way that almost nothing else has. He said that the greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. He was not talking about positive thinking. He was not talking about manifesting or visualization or any of the shallow self-help derivatives of that idea. He was talking about the radical difference between a life lived in the grip of unconscious fear and a life lived from a position of genuine choice, between a life driven by death anxiety and a life that has metabolized that anxiety and emerged on the other side with something like freedom. You cannot choose not to be mortal. You cannot choose not to have the terror. You cannot undo the cognitive glitch that makes your brain incapable of imagining its own non-existence. But you can choose what you do with the awareness. You can choose whether the awareness drives you unconsciously, running your choices from the basement without your knowledge, or whether you bring it upstairs, look at it directly, and decide from that clear-eyed place, how you are going to spend the time you have. This is not a call to constant morbidity. It is not a prescription for sitting around thinking about death all day. It is a call to occasional honesty, to the willingness periodically to let the thought arrive and take it seriously instead of reaching for your phone, to ask the questions it is asking, to let the answers it reveals actually change something. Because the thought that keeps coming back is not haunting you, it is trying to help you. It is the most honest part of you trying to get your attention. And the question is not how to make it stop. The question is whether you are finally ready to listen. Let us end with something concrete, something you can actually do, not as a therapeutic exercise, not as a productivity hack, not as another item on the list of self-improvement strategies you cycle through without any of them actually changing anything, but as a genuine reckoning. The philosopher Epictetus, a Stoic who was born a slave and who thought more clearly about what matters than almost anyone who has ever lived, had a practice called memento mori, remember you will die, not as a gloomy meditation, as a daily orientation, a brief, deliberate invitation to the awareness of mortality that serves as a filter for everything else. Before you spend 3 hours on something that doesn't matter, memento mori. Before you bite your tongue on something true that needs to be said, memento mori. Before you defer again the life you actually want to live in favor of the life that is expected of you, memento mori. This is not morbidity. This is the opposite of morbidity. This is the most life-affirming practice imaginable because it is the practice of choosing your life rather than defaulting into it, of spending your finite and irreplaceable time on the things that are actually yours rather than on the management of other people's perception of you, of being, finally, the person you actually are, rather than the performance you have been running since the first time you realized that death was real and something had to be done about it. You are going to die. Nothing changes that. But everything changes depending on whether you know it. Not intellectually, not abstractly, in the full, felt, embodied, operational sense of someone who has looked at it directly and refused to look away. That knowledge is not comfortable. It was never supposed to be comfortable. It was supposed to be clarifying. And if you let it, it will be the most clarifying thing that ever happened to you. Not the death itself, the knowing, the living in full awareness that this is temporary, that this specific and unrepeatable version of the world that includes you will not exist for very much longer. And what you do with that fact, right now, today, with this actual life that is actually in progress, is entirely up to you. That is the psychology of why you cannot stop thinking about death. And that is what the thought has been trying to tell you the whole time.
Hello. What is this? Sean Carl, the passage of the meaning of life. Thank you for allowing download.
Hello, I'm Alexander Rose, the Executive Director here at Long Now. Today, I'm going to be joined by Sean Carroll from Caltech and Santa Fe Institute, who's a theoretical physicist who's been really studying the nature of time itself and the human experience of time and really how we fit in it. And here at Long Now, we've been doing talks that kind of relate to time in many ways, but this is the first time that we're doing it on time itself. I'm very excited to have Sean here. Welcome, Sean Carroll.
Thanks very much, Sander. It's a great pleasure to be talking about time, the nature of time, what it means for all of us at the Long Now Foundation. Obviously, folks at Long Now have been thinking very carefully about time, about the human aspects of time, about how to measure it, how to think about it. And that's my jam. That's what I'm very, very interested in doing. You know, time is just so important to who we are as human beings, right? We feel like time is passing around us or we're flowing through time. The metaphors, they go back and forth. I'm not sure whether we're moving through time or time is moving around us. But either way, time is just crucial to what it means to be a person. We plan for the future. We remember the past. Some of us are so fascinated by the nature of time that we become professional physicists and we learn about what time means from the physicist's point of view. And we learn a lot. Like, physicists understand a great deal about the nature of time. But there's something interesting, maybe a little scary, that happens when you learn about time from the perspective of physicists. You learn equations, they tell you how physical systems evolve. But this idea that time passes, or that time flows, or that somehow we move through time, that central, most obvious idea about time in our everyday lives, disappears. It's nowhere to be found in the fundamental laws of physics, but it's clearly there in our everyday lives. And we think that we're made of things that follow the fundamental laws of physics. So what is going on? That's what I want to talk about with you today, how to reconcile how physicists think about time with how we experience it in our everyday lives, and what that reconciliation teaches us for what time means and what it means to be a person. So let me start by explaining what I mean when I say that this passage of time notion disappears when you learn about time from the physicist's point of view. What does a physicist do? What's a typical physicist kind of problem to contemplate? Okay, well, think about the planets in the solar system moving around the sun. This is the kind of thing that physicists are really good at, paradigmatic. Kepler, Galileo, Newton, those people. You're given the state of some physical system, by which in this case we mean the positions of all the planets, where they're located in space, and how they're moving, right? The velocity. That's just one moment of time. You don't need to be given the history of the planets.
How the fuck is it gonna jump out like that?
At one moment of time, you're given where they are and how they're moving right now. And then you have a recipe. You have the laws of physics. You have Newton's laws of motion and Newton's law of gravitation. And from those, you can predict the future. From the present state of the system, you can tell where it's going to be next. You can predict eclipses in the future. You can say where the planets are going to be. You can make an almanac, okay? But there's something extra that is very, very important. You can also predict the past, or retrodict if you prefer. Given the current state of the system, the laws of physics tell you exactly what was going on in the entire past history of the system. And real astronomers actually do this. They extrapolate the current state of the solar system millions or billions of years into the past and the future. So buried underneath that little discussion is an idea that we call conservation of information. All of the information you need about the system right now, its positions, its velocities, and so forth, suffices to predict the entire future and past of the system. If I told you exactly the state of the system 1,000,000 years ago, you could predict what it would be doing right now. This is the disappearance of this idea that time is flowing. Time, to a physicist, ever since Isaac Newton, it becomes kind of a label. There's this moment, there's the past moment, there's the future moment. There's nothing special about what we call now or the present moment. The laws of physics describe every moment of time as being on an equal footing, and the information contained in every moment of time persists into the past and the future. That's very different from what we're used to in our everyday lives. Just as one simple example, imagine you come across, there's a glass of water on the table. It's a slightly cool glass of water, okay? And you ask yourself, well, what was the state of that glass of water a few minutes ago? Maybe it was just a cool glass of water just sitting there, but maybe it was a glass of room temperature water with some ice cubes in it, and maybe those ice cubes melted and cooled off the water. The point is, just given the macroscopic observable information about the world, you can't say where it came from. Unlike the perfect information we have for the solar system in the real world, where we see the glass of water and we can see a little bit about it, right? Its temperature, whether there's ice in it or not, but we're not looking at every atom or molecule of water, then suddenly information is no longer conserved. There's information that used to be there in the system. Did it have an ice cube in it or not? And that's disappeared over time. We have an irreversible process. So what we're seeing in a macroscopic world is what scientists and philosophers call the arrow of time, the difference between the past and the future. In particular, the asymmetry that we have when we think about now versus the past versus the future. And that asymmetry, that arrow of time, is not there in the fundamental laws of physics. We have to dig in a little bit to understand where it comes from. So let me just explain how that asymmetry between past and future shows up in our everyday lives. One aspect is that there is an asymmetry of knowledge, okay? In a very real sense, you can predict the future, but you're never really sure what's going to happen, right? You know, sometimes our predictions come out wrong. Whereas when it comes to the past, we can have records, we can have memories. There are things that exist in the universe right now, which we're very, very confident tell us something specific about an event that happened in the past, whether it's a photograph or a book or a fossil, a bone underneath the earth. These are artifacts right now that represent something definite about the past. We don't have photographs or artifacts that tell us about the future in the same way. But there's another asymmetry, not just knowledge between past and future, there's an asymmetry of influence between the past and future. We have in our minds the idea that the past is settled, right? It happened, there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas toward the future, we can make choices. We can do things now that affect the future. If you lift your left hand versus lifting your right hand, that might have an impact on the future, but nobody thinks that by doing something right now, you can influence the past. Where did these asymmetries come from? Why is it that we can know more about the past, but we can influence the future in some way? Again, it's nowhere in Newton's laws of motion, okay? Nor in any update of Newton's laws of motion. General relativity, electromagnetism, Schrodinger's equation in quantum mechanics, all of these attempts at finding a fundamental laws of physics have the feature that they treat the past, present, and future equally. Now, I'm not going to hold you in suspense too much. I actually know the answer to this question. Why is the past, present, and future so different to us? The answer is something called entropy and the second law of thermodynamics. I'm sure you've heard about this before. Entropy is basically, roughly, not exactly, but close enough, the disorderliness of a system, the randomness, the disorganization. And there is a law of nature that is true in our macroscopic everyday world that says that entropy increases over time. So a typical example might be an egg. You can have an unbroken egg. It's easy enough to break the egg to scramble the egg. And in that process, from unbroken to broken to scrambled, the entropy of the egg increases. You're mixing things up. You're making them more random. And that would just happen very easily and naturally in the world. Whereas, if you saw a movie of scrambled eggs reforming into an unbroken egg, you would know right away someone was playing the movie backwards in time. There's a directionality to the evolution of these systems. So the first law of thermodynamics just says energy is constant. That's good. The second law says that entropy increases over time in a closed, isolated system or in the universe as a whole. You can clean up your room, don't get me wrong. You can lower the entropy in a localized system by influencing it from the outside world. But overall, in the universe as a whole, entropy increases over time. So unlike Newton's laws or other attempts at fundamental laws of physics, the second law of thermodynamics does tell the difference between the past, present, and future. It says that entropy will be higher in the future. It was lower in the past. Good, that's nice. That's an explanation of something, but we want to do better. Why is it the case? Why does entropy go up over time? So this was roughly speaking solved in the 1870s by Ludwig Boltzmann, an Austrian physicist, and some of his friends. What they did was, they said entropy is not just a rough idea, it's a highly precise quantitative concept that we can attach equations to. That's what physicists like to do with their lives, attach equations to things you thought you understood. So entropy, in Boltzmann formulation, is just, look, when you look at a system, a macroscopic thing, a glass of water with an ice cube in it, or cream and coffee, or an egg, you don't see every little bit of that system. You don't see the molecules. You don't see the atoms of which it is made. So let's take cream and coffee as a classic example, okay? If the cream and coffee are separate from each other, there's a number of ways you could imagine changing the positions of the individual molecules in the cream or molecules in the coffee so that macroscopically you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But if you started mixing them together, if you started taking the cream and mixing it into the coffee, you would be able to tell the difference. So there's a small number of rearrangements you could imagine. Whereas if it's all mixed up, right? If all the cream and all the coffee are mixed together, then there are a large number of ways you can rearrange the atoms and molecules to make it look exactly the same. So Boltzmann says that's what entropy is. Entropy is a way of counting how many ways there are to rearrange the fundamental constituents of a system so that it macroscopically looks the same to us. From that point of view, it's not at all surprising that entropy goes up as a function of time. It's simply because there are more ways to be high entropy than to be low entropy. If you have a medium entropy system and just let it go, let it do its thing, let it evolve into the universe, it will naturally increase in entropy since there are so many more configurations that look that way. That part is easy. The hard part is, if you have a medium entropy system, why was it lower entropy in the past? If it started lower entropy, you can explain why.
Oh my God, really?
But you seem to need a new principle to explain that. And indeed, that is exactly true. Think of the arrow of time this way. There's no arrow of space, right? If you were an astronaut floating out there in space, there'd be no difference between up, down, left, right, forward, backward. But you know, if you're here on Earth, there's an arrow of space, you can tell the difference between up and down. Nobody thinks that arrow of space is deeply ingrained in the fundamental nature of reality. It's just because you're in the vicinity of an influential object, the Earth. The same story is true for the arrow of time. The arrow of time, according to modern physics, is not built into the fundamental nature of reality. We experience it because we live in the aftermath of an influential event, the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago. For reasons that cosmologists do not understand, the Big Bang was very low entropy. The early universe was very orderly compared to what it could have been. Now, why is that true? good question, very active research question at the frontiers of modern cosmology, but for our purposes today, we don't know why. But it's true. The Big Bang had a low entropy, and once you say that, it's clear that entropy is going to go up. It's been going up for the last 14 billion years. It's going to continue to go up.
No wonder Northlock wanted your help with this pier. I bet the quake didn't do a number on just this one, though.
I don't know if I'm enjoying this one. It's maybe because of the many times I've listened to it. Cognitive Ghost.
I've got a little experiment for you today, Michael, and all of the people who are watching and listening.
Okay.
Your job is very simple. All you got to do is I'm going to read you a list of words, and you need to count how many words on this list begin with the letter S. Okay? Very simple. Just keep the number in your head. Okay. Right, here are the words. Bed, awake, tired, dream, blanket, doze, yawn, night, dark, pillow, rest, and nap. Got it? Okay?
Yeah.
2.
All right. I want you to hold on to that number in your head.
Oh shit.
And just know that this episode today is all about cognitive ghosts. We'll come back to it in a moment. This episode is brought to you by Cancer Research UK.
If you wanted to type out the entire human genome, you would have to type at 60 words a minute for 8 hours a day for about 50 years. Okay, that's the scale of the DNA rulebook inside each one of your cells, telling it when to grow, when to divide, and when to stop.
And different tissues read that same rulebook in different ways. So a skin cell doesn't behave like a lung cell.
And cancer can begin when those instructions change. Not one dramatic moment, but through small, gradual edits over time.
Now, cancer isn't one disease. It is more than 200 types, shaped by where those changes to the rulebook happen and how cells respond.
Cancer Research UK is the world's largest charitable funder of cancer research, backing studies across all types of cancer.
Work that takes years of very careful, steady progress to deliver each breakthrough.
For more information about Cancer Research UK, their research, breakthroughs, and how you can support them, visit cancerresearchuk.org/the rest is science.
Oh my god, bro.
Hannah, I can't wait to see what the point of that list of words were, but I will tell the listeners out there that for this episode, Hannah and I decided to explore the phrase cognitive ghosts and what that means to us. So we've both come prepared with some cognitive ghost stories, and I can't wait to see how we both interpreted that and how it all comes together.
Okay, have you managed to hold on to that number in your head?
Yes, I have.
Right, how many of that list started with the letter S?
0.
Correct. Right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 3 words, and you need to tell me whether these words were on the list. All right?
Okay.
Blanket.
No.
But blanket was.
Correct. Jellyfish.
Nope.
No.
Correct. Sleep.
Nope.
No.
How is your brain feeling right now?
Well, it's feeling a little,
Nothing.
how do I describe this? I think I've heard of studies like this before. Where there's like a word that should so totally be on the list, but you don't mention it. And so I start to confabulate that it was on the list. I would have thought sleep was one of them if I hadn't have been paying very close attention to whether word started with S or not. And so when sleep never showed up, because I was waiting for it, I was like, it's the only S word that's going to fit this list, and it never happened. I'm like, sleep is very conspicuously absent.
Absolutely. Okay, so this experiment that I've just done on you is what is described in a paper that's called The Awareness of Novelty for Strangely Familiar Words, a laboratory analogue of the deja vu experience. So essentially,
Interesting.
what is going on in your head while you're listening to that list, and particularly when I ask you if the word sleep appeared, is that you know that it wasn't on the list because it starts with an S, and you've already told out loud that there were no S words.
That's what happened,
At the
yeah.
same time, the word feels kind of spookily familiar, right? Sort of like triggers this memory that isn't a memory. And this is what they describe as artificial deja vu. This is the only way, really, that we have to trigger deja vu in a lab in order to study it.
Oh, so we get people to think of it sort of quietly, and then later it's deja vu-like when they hear it again.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Even though they know it was a false memory, they never actually heard it in the first place.
I gotta say, it's so much less cool than real deja vu, but that really
real deja vu
hammers home the topic of the episode: cognitive ghosts. Things. I mean, that means a lot of things, but deja vu is definitely one. It's like really, really hard to conjure up yourself, and yet it fleetingly passes through. It interacts with us kind of, but our instruments aren't always ready. How can we study it?
So the thing that is quite nice about these experiments is that when you do this to people, when they're in an fMRI scanner, it's not the hippocampus, the memory center of your brain that lights up. Instead, when you hear the word sleep, it's the frontal cortex, which is the area of your brain that is responsible for decision making, for conflict resolution. That's the bit that kicks off. And so the argument here is that deja vu, as we experience it, it's not this false memory. It's more like your fact-checking software, as it were, in your head is kind of running through. It sort of feels as though there's something familiar, but you're running through your memories and not finding it. So it's your brain glitching, essentially saying, wait, no, we have we been here before? We haven't been here before. This familiarity that I'm feeling is a phantom signal.
Right.
And that you can see in the scan. So even though, as you say, it's nowhere near as cool as real deja vu, seeing it in the scan is also is nonetheless
wow.
Really cool.
I love that because, again, it's not as cool of an experience, but we just can't catch deja vu in the act and study it. It's still so mysterious. You're right, like the leading hypothesis for the feeling of deja vu, that, oh my gosh, this happened before, this is so familiar, but I can't tell why, that might be your brain trying to solve a little problem that it's created for itself. The processing of the data happened way faster than the perceptual awareness, so your brain is already responding with feelings and associations to the thing before you actually see it. And you're going, hold on, but this is already here, deja vu. So that list strategy allows us to do a similar thing with less effective power. It's not like, whoa, trippy. Is my brain okay? But if it allows us to recreate some of those brain processes, maybe we'll finally be able to study deja vu better. I would love to be able to induce it for real.
For real,
I
know.
Weaponized, though.
In what way?
Well, I could convince people that I was a sorcerer. I could convince them that demons were at work. I don't know. That'd obviously be my first use of the technology.
Of course, it goes without saying, rather than for the advancement of human understanding and the sum total of all scientific knowledge. Of course, you being a sorcerer makes much more sense. The thing is, so much of how your brain works, right, is memory is essentially a survival strategy. It's like, can you take the experiences that you had before and apply them in the future to make life easier, to make your survival more likely? And so what we know now about memory is that it's not like watching a video recording of where you've been. It's like you take the gist of your experience, and that's the stuff that you recall. So essentially what's happening when you have a deja vu in real life, when you have a kind of full-blown one, is you, I don't know, walk into a room and there's something about the gist of that room that triggers a feeling of familiarity. Maybe the chairs are laid out and there's something about them that's similar to the way the chairs were laid out in your grandmother's kitchen or whatever it might be. So your brain is like, oh, okay, I've been here before. There's this familiarity, and goes looking for the relevant memory effectively. And when it doesn't find it, that's the experience that you have, this kind of very strange feeling that you've been there before, because you have the familiarity but without the memory.
Yes, and it shows us that those two things, familiarity and the memory, are separate.
Yeah.
That we can feel that something is familiar. We can know that we know something, but not immediately be able to recall it. And that very specific phenomenon has a different name.
That's presque vu. Presque vu, when it's like on the tip of your tongue.
The tip of the tongue. Yes, I love presque vu because it's so trippy. It's so weird, and it makes me feel so out of control of my own mind. And it's not just a me or a you thing. It's like a socially contagious phenomenon. Presque vu is the experience of, as we said, tip of the tongue. When you know that you know something, but you cannot call it to mind and say it. You can picture the face of that actor. Oh my gosh, I've seen like every movie they've been in, but what is their name? The people around you often can't help, because in some way that block in your mind is contagious, and everyone at the dinner table goes, oh yeah, no, I can't, what is that? It wasn't, oh, I can name all the movies he's been in. Or I can picture the person, they're a coworker of mine, we all know them, but what the heck is their name? And it doesn't come to you until you stop trying to find it. The whole time you know it. It's not like I can't remember. You know that it's there, it's in there. And then you change gears, you start a different topic of conversation, you go make a sandwich, and then suddenly you go, oh, Gary Sinise. That was the actor who played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. Duh. Presque vu is also a kind of cognitive, ghostish thing. I think, can study it better than deja vu. We know a bit more about what might be going on. It seems to be the brain trying to help us, except it missed the mark. And we're thinking of all the movies and all the other actors that have been in that movie or other related things to the target. And to help us, the brain inhibits recollection of the actual fact we want and facts that are adjacent to the ones that we're pulling up. And so while you're in that space trying to access that target, you're getting everything but it. And you need to stop, have your brain start helping you in a different way, and now you can open the box that has the target in it.
I really like, I don't like that feeling at all. I absolutely despise that feeling of the word being on the tip of your tongue. The other one, there's one other, which is called jamais vu, which is where you can sort of take something quite solid and make it into something quite ghostly. And this, by the way, jamais vu, is the feeling of not knowing something that is actually familiar. This is very easy to trigger in a lab. So there's a paper on this which is called the induction of jamais vu in the laboratory. What a great title for this paper, because essentially what they did is they took loads of university students and they told them to take a single word and just repeat it over and over and over on a piece of paper. So they used words like door, money, the was one of them, and the students were told to keep writing as fast as they could, and they were only told to stop once they felt peculiar, or when their hand hurt, or when they just couldn't take it anymore. And about 70% of the students stopped because they felt peculiar. They felt peculiar before their hand hurt. And normally it's only about 30 repetitions that you need to do that can induce this. If you just choose whichever word you like, write it out 30 times, and it'll start to do something really strange in your brain.
I think so many of us have accidentally discovered this, like, as kids. You repeat a word over and over again, seller, 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 seller. And then you start to go, how is that a word? This seems so weird suddenly.
Doesn't make any sense.
We're both moving in the direction of easier to study, but more eerie feeling.
The author of that paper, the induction of Jamais Vu in the laboratory, called Chris Moulin, he thinks that there's a good reason for Jamais Vu, which is that if you get an animal who's sort of stuck in a repetitive behavioural loop, like I don't know, examining the same rock over and over and over and over, it makes them really vulnerable, right? It's sort of a survival thing. His idea, I mean, difficult to validate this, but his idea is that if you have neurons that are firing too repeatedly in the same path, right, then the brain triggers Jamais Vu to make the familiar feel like it's really alien, to sort of shock the brain out of doing the same thing again and again and again and again and again, kind of forcing your brain to go and pay attention to something else instead.
Wow, that's a pretty clever technique. And I like that theory, because it makes so much sense for survival, for that you create your own novelty. But it's such a fun little trick to do when you're bored. Just looking at an object, like looking at a bottle, you're just like, oh my gosh, bottles are so friggin' weird when you think about it. If you really just focus long enough. And it's our brain trying to keep things fresh.
Like you've sort of built most of your career on taking really ordinary things, Michael, and saying, they're really weird if you think about them.
Yeah, hey, Vsauce jamais vu here. Exactly. It's like, we all know that things fall down, but which way is down? And then you start to go, oh shoot, which way is down? I could have answered that 5 minutes ago, but now I'm stuck. Thing is, there's lots of these, right? There's lots of different situations where your brain you have these two underlying systems in your brain, either memory and familiarity or whatever it might be, and they're just mismatching ever so slightly. Yes. There are so many dejas, or so many vus, if you will, depending on how people have decided to construct the word, that we know even less about. For example, deja reve is something that I've tried to research to no avail. What is it? Deja reve is that feeling when you witness something in real life and you go, hey, I saw this in a dream before, I think. That's happened to me. I've been like, oh my gosh, I dreamt this, guys. And one, it's boring to everyone but me, right? Like no one else feels this eeriness. They're just like, okay, man, I don't know, like you're not psychic, stop. But it's a weird feeling, and you could only really find information on it on like Reddit, where people are like, yeah, that's happened to me, or something like sort of new age wellness blogs talk about it. And why that feeling happens, we don't know. Is it related to deja vu, where instead of thinking, oh, this has happened before in real life, something's a bit different, and we start thinking, hey, this happened before but in a dream? We honestly don't know. So that's why I think cognitive ghosts is a great overarching category name for these things. There's so much research that still has to be done.
But the thing is that there's lots of examples of where people have had memories of things that have happened in past lives, right? That they have discussed and been absolutely convinced that they happened to them before, right? But that actually, once you dig into them, our brains are not very good at remembering the origin of where our stories come from. So there's a couple of really famous stories about this of people who've been hypnotized, and then while they were under hypnosis, they've come up with these incredibly elaborate stories. There's one in the 50s where an American housewife called Virginia Taihe, and when she was hypnotized, she claimed to be this woman called Bridie Murphy, who was born in Cork in 1798. She gave all these details about her husband, the grocers, all these Irish songs and so on, and everyone was really stunned because she'd never been to Ireland, and there was no internet to look things up, and how could she know the name of this obscure 19th century Irish grocer, which she got right, by the way. And then this is all in the 1950s. Journalists end up going to Chicago, start knocking on doors, they discover that there was a Irish immigrant who lived across the street from her when she was younger. And the neighbor used to tell her stories when she was a kid, singing all these songs, including the names of all of these places. And the neighbor's name was Bridie Murphy Corkhill, right? So it's like you have the memory, but you don't remember where it came from. This has happened over and over again, where people have thought that they are recalling something from a past life, but actually it's from a novel that they read or a story that they heard. So I think that that's the thing about the deja reve potentially, is that it might be a deja vu where you're getting the familiarity and the memory mixed up, or it might be that you have experienced some similarities in a story before that you don't remember you watched it, you just thought that you dreamt it instead.
Yes. I think the nature of memory is responsible for so many of the cool things that we love to share and talk about and experience. I've thought a lot about whether reality was different when I was a kid. This is, again, like a weird one, but you'll see this on Instagram and TikTok all the time, where people are like, you remember how in like the 90s, everything was like more colorful, or like the sky was bluer? And I feel that way too. I feel like the color of light was different, but I can't tell if it's because photographs of the time used different film and printing techniques in books and magazines were different, and reality was the same, but I just can only remember it now by looking at photos, which give me the wrong impression of how things looked. But we prototypicalize our experiences when they turn into memories. So colors become more primary, making them blockier and brighter and more saturated. So when we think back to, man, my school was so bright, and now when I return as an adult later in life, and it just seems smaller and dingier and duller. A lot of it is that remembering, like you said, is not a perfect replica. I think the word remember is perfect. We are remembering. We're like Frankensteining together what happened out of pieces that are slightly different this time. But it's not just memories that are being confabulated and constructed. It's also live experience. Blind sight is one of the freakiest cognitive ghosts. Blind sight is the phenomenon whereby someone is legally blind, they cannot see, they can't read a street sign, and yet they act as though they can see. It's very paradoxical. First of all, how does it happen? It's brain damage. It can be caused, for example, by severing the two halves of the brain, cutting the corpus callosum. A person with blind sight is legally blind. They need help. They can't read a book. They can't read a street sign. But if you throw something at them, they will flinch and they will try to block it.
What?
And if you ask them, well, why did you raise your arm? They cannot tell you why. They literally don't understand, and they confabulate answers. They say, oh, well, didn't you tell me that you were about to throw something? Or, well, I suddenly needed to raise my hand. The famous example is that you can show these people a prompt like, go get me a drink from the fridge. And they can't read it. They have no recollection of reading those words, and yet they will get up and go to the door. And if you say, hey, where are you going? They come up with all kinds of reasons. Oh, I heard a sound. And they truly believe these explanations.
Wait, hold on. I don't understand. How can they possibly read it if they're blind?
Because a non-conscious part of their brain is receiving the visual signal and responding to it, but the awareness is not getting the message. And so they can't access what's actually happening in front of them. Their eyes are still processing what they're seeing. It's just not being told to their conscious self. So they see the message, go get me a drink. And when I say they, I mean at an unconscious level. But then memory and awareness is never told. So their body starts reacting to things like even a bump in the road. They'll avoid the bump in the road, but they won't be able to tell you how they did it. And they come up with a ghostly, fabricated reason on the spot. Why did you take a step to the left? I don't think I did. I think I kind of tripped. But they didn't trip. It's just their brain is always trying to explain their own behavior to themselves, and they buy it wholesale. Blindsight in humans is really hard to study because you kind of have to wait for someone to have this particular kind of brain damage.
And under what conditions would someone get that kind of brain damage? That sounds like a sort of surgical intervention.
There are so many causes. There are all these different stages of visual processing in the brain and problems usually caused by stroke or tumors or anything. To almost any of those regions can sometimes result in blind sight. It's not common enough that we know that much about it, but it does provide yet another example of the fact that there's you, and then there are these ghosts inside that are doing a bunch of stuff without your authority and control.
These sort of shadows of your central self.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot. It might be maybe part because of you were describing about where do you sit in your body. We had this conversation a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. But I think that it's very tempting to believe that you have this sort of homunculus, as it were, this sort of center of yourself, that there's one version of you that exists. And all of these systems, your sight system, your memory system, your familiarity system, are kind of spinning off like a spider diagram from this central version of you. But when you describe things like that, when you describe people whose systems function perfectly well, but they just can't explain to themselves, it does make me wonder whether actually the whole idea of us having a single central self, like a homunculus, is actually real at all. Maybe we're just like the sum of ghosts rather than like a single individual with all of these things spinning off it.
I know. It's really trippy and it's really frustrating because as easy as it is to believe that I'm a homunculus, which means a little person inside my head pulling the levers and looking out the eyes, you then have to wonder, well, who's inside the mind of that little person? And you get an infinite regress that doesn't explain anything.
I think one thing that we do know for sure is that when there's a mismatch in the levers, the homunculus gets very confused.
Yeah, and it can be scary or it can be fun, depending on, how you interpret it. For me personally, I've got a really strong feeling of what's called high place phenomenon. I don't like heights at all, and I've gotten more and more scared of them as I've gotten older. It was so bad at one point that I looked this up. Basically, what high place phenomenon is that when you are up high and there's an edge or like a cliff, or you're on the patio of a high apartment building, I start to feel like I'm being drawn towards the edge. And it can feel either like there's a slant and I'm actually falling, or I'm being drawn, or I'm gonna fall off, basically. Or it can feel almost like an internal compulsion, like there's something in me that makes me want to jump. Our best idea about what causes this high place phenomenon is that right away, the high place, the ledge, the cliff scares you. And you become so scared that you could fall off, that your brain doesn't know how to deal with that fear, because you don't normally just suddenly leap 2 meters forward, right? And so to explain the fear, your brain creates a complete ghost, a confabulated, unreal desire. You must be falling in that direction, or you must want to, because nothing else would explain the fear. And so now you've got two things, the fear and an illusory belief that you're going to fling yourself off the edge.
I have to tell you, when I first moved to London, I got this feeling so intensely every time I got on the tube that what I really wanted to do was to jump off the platform. As the tube train came into the station, that it would be so easy to do it.
Yeah.
And then sort of catching yourself doing it. And I ended up talking to a therapist. I was seeing a therapist at the time, and talking to them about it. And apparently this version of high place phenomenon, or l'appel du vide, or the call of the void. There's a nice French name for everything in this episode, it turns out.
There is, yes. I love that. The call of the void. Hello, I'll answer.
Yes. In Londoners, on the tube, it's phenomenally common. 60% of Londoners apparently have this exact feeling. So, and that kind of demonstrates, I think, that it's like, this is something that is in all of us, this mismatch, this sort of, this fight, this tension between the different versions of ourselves that's going on.
That's right, because the point here is that this desire to fling yourself off the ledge or into the oncoming train wasn't already there already. It seems to be the only interpretation the brain can come up with to explain certain fears that are generated and the strength of those fears. So, yeah, we're in a lot of ways just along for the ride, and it's a crazy ride.
There are other examples of this, like there's a tussle going on in your mind of what you want to do. I'm thinking about, like, when you see a really, really cute puppy.
Yes, it's called cute aggression, and it is actually a pretty new area of investigation. We've known about this forever, but it's been hard to pinpoint what's going on. Cute aggression describes the feeling we have when we see something cute that goes beyond just, oh, I want to protect you, I want to keep you warm, and it turns into, I'm overwhelmed by how cute these photos are, or this puppy, and I just want to squeeze it, and I just want to bite it and eat you up. And the study of this, I just love. Let me open this up, because the researchers just showed people super cute things, and then listened to them talk about it, and they coded people's responses. And of course, you're going to see the usual caretaking things. I want to protect it. I want to hold it. They say appraisal utterances like, oh, that's so cute. Or maybe they'll say, I want to approach it. But they might feel overwhelmed. I can't stand how cute this is. But then you go even further and you start to see things that can be coded as aggression. It like you see it and you just want to go, Urgh! You want to say grr, you want to squeeze it, you want to pinch the cheeks, you want to eat it up.
I want to eat you, yeah.
Through your gritted teeth you speak. And in a lot of ways, this is, I think, similar to the ghost of, I want to fling myself off the edge.
Right.
But it's not being created by the brain as an explanation for a fear. It's being created by the brain to bring itself back down to homeostasis. That the instinct we have to protect and pay attention to and cuddle and care for cute things is so overwhelming that the neurotransmitters responsible flood the brain. And to bring itself back down to normal, it has to bring in other neurotransmitters that do the opposite effect and encourage aggressive behaviors. That's the current leading theory, because we've looked at all the other options, but it's just that you see it, it's so cute, but you need to also push it away, but you also need to, like, hurt it because you're being overwhelmed by your desire to not hurt it.